Hey everyone, last week I made a 2-player deck building game for the multiplayer game jam. It went really well, but there still was a huge glaring problem in my last video, and I'm surprised more of you didn't call me out on it. I said my intention was to use this card game as a minigame in my 2.5D adventure game, and that game is a single-player game. Just slapping my multiplayer minigame on the title screen as a bonus game is a possibility, but I wanted to be able to challenge NPCs to play against, like Gwent in The Witcher 3, or more recently, performing the linking minigame with wildlife NPCs in Symphony. However, because of the way that I designed Tomato Fighters, programming a fair AI would be somewhat of a challenge, especially with the 1-week time window I'm giving myself. Despite publishing 3 games now, I still don't have much experience in AI programming. And secondly, Tomato Fighters is a strategy deck building board game played at an action game speed. The AI would need to strategize and take pauses to behave like a player, and it wouldn't be as easy as just playing each hand as they come. The AI would need to have some long-term strategy in order to be competent against high-level players. Sure, an easy AI should make some mistakes, and a couple blunders here and there to allow players to grasp the mechanics of the game, but I knew I had to dig deep and make something a little more strategic. So how did I go about implementing an AI for a board game when I knew nothing about AI theory? And more importantly, was I able to create a functional AI within 1 week? Let's dig in. So initially, I set out to do the minimum viable AI. This AI would take any given hand, use the movement cards in it first, then move to an open space and dump their hand on it. I called this the Move and Dump AI, and it was easy enough to set it up in 1 day. While working on the Move and Dump AI, I also set up a framework that allowed each AI to reference a helper class of logical tactics. For example, attempt to drop blight tokens on enemy tile is a tactic that allows them to quickly drop their blight cards on an enemy tile. The AI classes themselves contain the broader strategy and could reference these individual tactics from the helper class to help execute their plan. Each AI generates a list of input commands that feed directly into the input system I programmed in 2-player mode. The AI waits for a fraction of a second between executing each individual step, but also included in this list of inputs is a long wait command. The long wait makes the AI stop and wait a little bit, simulating how a mere sack of flesh and bones might behave. With the basic AI set up and functioning, I started to get a little overwhelmed with the task that was ahead of me. As I considered what kind of strategies and tactics to program in next, I started to imagine all the places I could go with it. I could make a pacifist AI that sits in a corner and tends to a few high-scoring tomato plants. I could make an ultra-aggressive AI that throws negative blight tokens on all of the other players' tomato plants, rendering them useless. I could make a tomato thief AI that builds a ton of movement in their deck and just swipes the tomatoes of other players. As I pondered this, it eventually dawned upon me that the perfect AI would balance between these things situationally, depending on a huge dataset of risk and reward associated with each choice. To move beyond the simple move and dump, I'd have to start setting some broader strategy in these AI classes, and so I settled on making an aggressive AI first. This aggressive AI would focus almost entirely on the cards that allow you to play blight tokens, which subtract from the other player's score. Here's how that went. First, I made Blight Aggro 1, Blight City. Blight City was a good one. They were just like Move and Dump, except they sometimes step outside of their tile to dump blight tiles off. That worked well until they just started claiming the tiles that had blight on them. Blight Aggro 2, also known as Street Blighter 2, came next. This one would attempt to drop blight cards on enemy spaces, so now we're actually kind of getting somewhere with this strategy. And Blight Aggro 3, Tomato Blighters, was made to be the ultimate blighter. It actually engaged with the system of picking up and putting down these tokens. Lastly, I refactored the code so that the AIs could face off against themselves, and I hit play. As I sat there watching my creations battle to the death, something dawned upon me. They were making extremely poor decisions when it came to risk and reward. Even though my code was starting to spaghetti out with different scenarios in which the AI should execute different tactics, something was missing. The AI couldn't read token counts yet and prioritize higher scoring tokens, and also it couldn't path around a player or even understand their strategy at all. It turns out that 1 week was not enough time for me to create a robust AI system for this type of game. And so I had to do what many game developers are called upon to do. What separates those that finish projects from those that endlessly toil away. I uttered the sacred phrase, "That's good enough for a V1," and I moved on. My goal for this month is to have a vertical slice of my larger project. So I need to keep moving. I have completed one layer of that vertical slice cake, and that layer is card minigame with a functional AI. And there is a lot more cake to make. I'll revisit AI in the future. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching this video. Your comments from last time inspired me to keep going and make another one. So thanks, and I'll see you next time.